full house at such short notice. We only put this event together about a week ago, so it's really fantastic to see so many people turning out to have this really important and hopefully informative conversation with us this evening. I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Lana Tatour here with us this evening, and I'll be sitting with her to have a conversation about some of the issues that are unfolding right now in Gaza mainly, but in the broader context of Palestine and Israel. To start off, I'm going to invite Anne from the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre. My head was saying it wasn't coming out. To start us off with a welcome to country. Thank you so much, Anne.
Hello, Mina Lisa Colson from the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre. I'm speaking Palawakani, the language of Tasmanian Aborigines. We stand on Aboriginal land, Palawa, Tasmanian Aboriginal country. Here where the three rivers, Cunnamuruka, River Tamar, Piputumela, South-Esk, and Maikilla, North-Esk rivers join as one in today's Launceston. In the same way, we stand together here with our sisters and brothers as we stand together in solidarity for Palestine. Nairi Ninatu, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'll invite Lana to join me here. Do you have a preference?
Thank you. And not really.
Okay. I think it's really great to start with that welcome, and I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're gathering on here tonight, and also that I live and raise my family on here in beautiful northeast Lutruwita, as an Irish woman who comes from very far afield, and to pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to pay particular gratitude to our Palawa Pakana friends who are here tonight, and thank them for their continued support each and every week for our friends in Palestine. I'd also like to just acknowledge those Palestinian people who are in the room, Dr. Lana Tatour and Dr. Adel Yusuf, who's recently joined us here in northern Tasmania, and any others in the room who are particularly feeling the events of recent months in a way that some of us can only imagine. I'll start by inviting Lana to say a few words about what we're going to talk about tonight. I will give a very brief introduction to Lana, but she's well able to speak for herself, and I'll probably drop the doctor quite frequently because I've known this woman a very long time.
Please do.
And I was very fortunate to meet Lana 16 years ago, as I worked out recently, which kind of blew my mind. Back in the north of Ireland, when we worked together on a project with Israelis and Palestinians who were working across civil society in Israel. And it's been a friendship and a working partnership that's crossed 3 continents now, so we're very happy to be living in the same country and raising our toddlers at the same time together. And it's been really wonderful to have her come visit to do some work, and her generous offer to do this speaking event in what is a very busy schedule for her. So Lana, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm a Palestinian scholar, but before I start, I just want to also acknowledge that we are on stolen land, and that genocide is the story of settler colonialism in Palestine and here in so-called Australia. We see genocide in different ways. We see it now in Gaza in the most brutal, in the most raw form. But genocide also takes other forms, and it is the underlying story of settler colonialism. And I really want to thank Lisa for the welcome to country, and I feel honored and privileged to be here tonight, and in the midst of this horror that is Gaza, one of the things that really is heartwarming is the incredible solidarity of Aboriginal community with Palestinians, despite the difficulties and the brute racism and violence that they're facing. And that solidarity means so much and has meant so much, especially as someone who's Palestinian, who's settler on this land, but also indigenous in Palestine and coming from Palestine. It's been a moment where it has been the most comfort. I also want to thank Grace for organizing the event, Tom, and thank Archana for hosting us in this absolutely beautiful, stunning venue, and more than that, for showing courage in doing this act. And that's something that needs to be pointed, because it's not taken for granted in the atmosphere that we are in, where people are being harassed, intimidated. So, you know, all these small bits are really kind of a, I can't say, you know, there's nothing really hopeful at this moment, but they are meaningful act, and I'm so grateful, and I'm so grateful for everyone coming here and taking the time this evening to join us.
Thank you, Lana. There will be many more people to thank later, which I will come back to. These things don't happen in isolation; they happen with the community. Let's go to Gaza. I think that's probably the reason a lot of people are in this room tonight, because of the events that have unfolded in the last few months. Some of us have been engaged or engaging with issues around Palestine for a long time. Some of us may have visited there, and for some it might be something that's just recently maybe become an issue for you, or something of curiosity because of the nature of what we're seeing playing out. But I think Gaza is really the biggest issue we're all looking at right now, and as you said, the sheer scale of it. I know a lot of us who are connected previously to issues in Palestine have seen other assaults on Gaza and wars on Gaza unfold. I know I was there on my first visit in the West Bank in 2008, and because it's such a small region, even though I wasn't in Gaza proper, I could hear the bombs going off at night that were being dropped. And every morning I would walk up to the community media centre I was volunteering at and live video call a doctor in the hospital in Gaza City and get the latest update on the death toll, while the buildings shook and, you know, injured people were carried in the corridors behind them. And at that time I thought, quite naively it would seem, at least now people know what's happening here, and at least now something has to change, because that seemed indiscriminate and extreme even at that time. And things didn't change. In fact, there were multiple wars and attacks on Gaza in subsequent years, where the death toll sometimes rose. There were violent responses to non-violent actions when the Great March of Return happened, and things have continued have continued along that path. I don't think any of us expected the scale of what has unfolded in Gaza in recent months, and it has been, I think, amplified by the nature of social media. I've worked and been engaged with community and youth work in various countries affected by conflict for a number of years, in northern Sri Lanka and Liberia after the Civil War, and in the north of Ireland. But we've never seen anything like this before. The images being live fed to us across our social media, so I think it's brought a level of shock and kind of overwhelm for a lot of us. But let's talk about what you think, Lana, is going on in Gaza right now, and what does it mean in the broader context for what's happening in Israel and Palestine.
Thank you. Maybe I'll start by picking up at this particular moment, because we're constantly talking about how, we thought that previous assaults were horrible. They shook us. And we are now witnessing something on a completely different scale. And social media is part of it, but it truly is on a different scale. In practice, Israel has dropped a nuclear bomb on Gaza without dropping a nuclear bomb on Gaza. This is what we are seeing. What we are seeing is a complete destruction of anything that could sustain life. At the moment, we are talking about 2.3 million people in Gaza. 1.7 are refugees from 48. That means they originate from south of Palestine, which is now south of Israel. They fled the war. They were expelled from their homes, from their lands, from their villages in 1948, finding shelter in Gaza. So we are talking about a population that is already impacted by the 1948 massive Nakba, what Palestinians call Nakba, the catastrophe, the expulsion of most Palestinians from their homeland. We are talking about a population today that half of it are children, and I think about 70% are under the age of 21, making this a war or genocide of children. We are talking about a population that has been under occupation, military occupation, since 1967. We are talking about a population that has been under brutal siege in the last 16, 17 years now. When I say brutal siege, it means that Israel has the effective control on all aspects of Palestinian life. It controls sea, land, air. It controls the population registry. You can't be born or die in Gaza without passing through the Israeli registration, population registration. Israel controls all imports and exports that go into Gaza. The siege meant that you have Israeli officials, military, legal advisors that for 16, 17 years sit every week and decide what are the goods that will go in and out of Gaza. And this is not just an exaggeration, this is a known story. Yes to parsley, no to coriander, or was it the other way around? To that level. So we're gonna, before the school year starts, allowing pencils in, but not notebooks. This is the level of detail to which Palestinian life has been controlled. Every single small aspect of their lives. What we are seeing now, what we are seeing now is a total destruction of all means that sustain life. Half of the houses in Gaza no longer exist. Half. Hospitals, there are only 11 partially functioning hospitals out of 35. Mosques, churches, municipal buildings, all universities in Gaza have been destroyed. Over 100 professors killed. Over 7,000 students killed. Large number of schools in Gaza has been destroyed. Archives, libraries, cafes, bakeries, grocery stores, everything that could be destroyed is being destroyed. And the goal is very clear: to erase anything that can allow people to live in Gaza when this ends at some point. People will not have houses to return to. The vast majority is not going to have houses to return to. Schools, kids will not have schools to return to. As epidemics are hitting Gaza, there are not going to be any medical facilities, any functioning hospitals to deal and treat patients. Government is not going to be functioning or partially functioning. So what we are seeing is an attempt to make Gaza illivable, to push Palestinians out of Gaza. And maybe I'll talk about it a bit later. And this is part of the story. This hasn't started at 710. The history is much longer than this. When people say it started at 710, it's because they look at the Israeli story, right? Where people were living their lives. People were not living their lives in Gaza. They were under brutal siege and occupation. So I'll talk a bit more later maybe on what are the goals of Israel in Gaza. But it's important to say that this hasn't started at 710 and that this is not about Hamas. Absolutely not about Hamas. This is a war on the Palestinian people. This is not a war on Hamas.
Thank you, Lana. I think moving on from that point, you say it's not about Hamas, it's about the Palestinian people. Again, this is something I think as a younger person, when I first traveled to Israel and Palestine in the West Bank particularly, I didn't fully understand the level of, I guess, impact or control on the day-to-day lives of Palestinians in other parts and beyond Gaza. I think we all knew about Gaza and the siege and had that kind of familiarity with some of the stories from there and the idea of it being kind of under, borders being controlled. When I traveled to the West Bank, I went, to learn. I had a long-standing interest in politics and journalism and international development, and I went, I think, with quite an open mind as much as I could, and really thought, yeah, it's complicated. I know it's complicated. There's different sides of the story, and I want to understand those sides of the story. So I spent a bit of time in Israel and then in the West Bank. And one of the things that really struck me, and I was about 26, 27 years of age at that point, was actually how stark and how clear it appeared. The things I had grown up with as an Irish woman on the back of the legacy of the peace agreement in Ireland, where we were finding how to live together as two people with different histories. There was a big fashion in the 90s to bring Palestinian and Israeli youth groups to Ireland for kind of cultural exchange programs with young people from the north of Ireland and from the south of Ireland, from Protestant and Catholic backgrounds. And I really believed in that story of having worked in peace organizations and peace and reconciliation work. And what I saw when I got there was that, there was what I was hearing in the media about peace talks and negotiations, and then the reality on the ground was the complete opposite. Around Bethlehem, where I stayed, there were illegal settlements all around the city. There were the separation barrier, the illegal separation barrier dominated the skyline. Every time I went back, because I went back quite regularly at the time, there were more illegal settlements. I took a road trip through the West Bank one time with a friend, and we couldn't get from A to B because each of the cities was in fact a ghetto, and everything around was controlled by Israeli checkpoints, that some of which were static, some of which popped up at any given time. People I knew in Bethlehem hadn't left the city in years because they were so afraid of having to interact with an Israeli checkpoint. This is a tiny little place if you think of, I don't think it's even the size of Tasmania, all of the region, but you're talking about really small distances. And what struck me was actually, this isn't complicated. There's complexity in it, but the reality is this is a colonial project. It is not a conflict between two equal sides. It's not a situation where people need to learn to get along. I was told time and time again by Palestinians, we don't have a problem with Jewish people. We used to live alongside them. We have a problem with Zionism and the Israeli state and what's happening under occupation. And that was reiterated to me again and again. Do you think you could speak more to that kind of broader context? I mean, we've seen it in the West Bank too. It's not about Hamas, because we're seeing what's happening now impact people in the West Bank, and also for Palestinian residents of Israel, which again I think is a demographic that gets kind of erased from the narrative when we talk about Israel itself.
Thank you. You might see me once in a while looking at my phone. It's just because I try to keep in track and I don't want to go for too long, because I tend to do that.
Likewise.
I mean, the whole discourse of, this is a really complicated situation. It's a discourse that comes to mask the power relations that exist, that shape what is Palestine. It doesn't mean that, as Grace said, there is no complexity, but the entire "this is too complicated" comes from a different place. I'll give you an example. As I work as a lecturer at university, and my field is in international politics, and I study settler colonialism and indigeneity and race. I teach development, right? Humanitarian crises. We now need to think, how do we raise it in the classroom? Why? If it was Ukraine or Russia, you can raise it easily. You're not going to face any ramifications for that. But people shy away from talking about Palestine. I know colleagues in different universities who decided to talk about Palestine, and that wasn't comfortable. I know complaints that have been made to lecturers who dared to raise Palestine. So, and all under the pretext that this is too complicated. You can talk about Ukraine and Russia as brutal occupation. You can talk about different parts of the world. But Gaza, Palestine, it's complicated. And here the complicated is a code word for stay silent. So what is the story? It's a very clear story. And then the details, obviously, the devil is in the details. And, I study, I can't say it's simple, right? Like, I'll be. But the story is one of settler colonialism. There is no way around it. It is a story of settler movement, Zionism, that started emerging in the late 19th century, seeking to build, a Jewish home in Palestine. Zionist leaders from the beginning were unashamedly, admitting or speaking the language of colonialism. They were talking about colonizing Palestine, building settlements in Palestine. They were a product of their time, which was imperialism, racism, colonialism, and this is how they saw their story. This is how they saw their project as one fitting within that framework. The difference was that it was also a group that faced anti-Semitism. But unfortunately, rather than taking the lessons and experience of anti-Semitism to stand, to take a stand against imperialism and colonialism, the Zionist movement actually replicated similar forms of violence and racism, and this time against the native Palestinian Arabs in Palestine. And in fact, most of the European Jews weren't Zionists at this stage. They actually preferred to stay in Europe. They wanted their future in Europe. They thought about themselves as part of Europe. And here what happens is we had actually an interesting process where there was this, not affinity is not the word, but there was both anti-Semites and Zionists agreed that the future of European Jews is not in Europe, but outside of Europe. Which, when you think about it, is quite a crazy thing. Coming to bringing it back to what is happening now in Palestine, settler colonialism, we know what it's about. It's about elimination, it's about genocide, it's a land-centered project. It's about removing the native population, the indigenous population, and instilling settlers instead. It's about raising indigenous sovereignties and placing settler polity instead. And this is what is happening in Palestine. And as Palestinians, we are losing, as time passes, we are losing more and more of our land, constantly. The situation in the West Bank is horrifying. In fact, the West Bank, most of the territory, at least half of the territory of the land, is actually already under Israeli control. Palestinians don't control their land. Settler violence is rampaging across the West Bank. With complete backup of the army, they work in cahoots. 2023, before Gaza started, was the record year since 2004 of Palestinian casualties in the West Bank. The number of settlers is steadily increasing. So when they say it is about Hamas, it is not about Hamas. It is about land and it is about demography. And we see that in the West Bank. The West Bank is not ruled by Hamas. Has the situation in the West Bank got better? You can't get a more compliant leadership than the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. They have security coordination with the Israeli state. Palestinians view them as agents of Israel. And yet, for ordinary Palestinians on the ground, the situation has gotten far worse. This is ruled by compliant leadership, not Hamas. So when they say this is about Hamas, it is just a way to really hide what this is about. And we're seeing it in Gaza now. When we look at the map, we are seeing that Israel started with cleansing the population at the north of Gaza, moving to Gaza City, to Khan Yunis. Every time telling the population, you need to move there because that would be the safe zone, right? And then assaults on Gaza, Khan Yunis, and moving south, Rafah, at the border of Egypt. And now, when over 1 million Palestinians are in Rafah, which is a tiny, 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 tiny territory that usually has 250,000 people, is now being bombed. They are bombing people in tents, refugees in tents, in Rafah, on the border with Egypt. The goal is absolutely clear. This is why they're destroying everything. This is why everything is subject to destruction. And this is also clear in, all the videos circulating in social media by Israeli soldiers who are, clearly saying, we'll be back in Gaza, this is our land, this is ours. And, we will have beautiful villas on the coast of Gaza. There are real estate companies already having plans for settlements on depopulated Palestinian lands. They have the names of settlements. They have detailed plans. These are discussions that are happening in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament. This is not a fringe. So this is not about Hamas. This is about this moment is an opportunity for Israel to gain more land. And the goal is the more land, the less people, the less Palestinian on that land. This is the goal of the genocide. This is what the genocide is there to achieve. Israel, when we say Israel hasn't achieved any of its military goals. Not releasing hostages. They released two hostages and killed 75 Palestinians, even though these hostages could have been released in an exchange deal. This is not about that. And we need to be clear, and we need to avoid the spinning of our government, the spin of media. Western media has been absolutely complicit with a genocide in Gaza. It has been aiding it. It has been acting irresponsibly every step of the way, including with the recent allegations against UNRWA, which is the main humanitarian organizations, the defunding. So we really need to be careful. There is a lot of spinning happening around, but we need to understand what really the goals of this operation. And the goals of this operation is not the release of hostages. It's not really the destruction of Hamas. They know they can't destroy Hamas. They haven't been able to. So far, they've only managed to destroy 20% of its military capabilities. It is about settler colonialism. It is about land. It is about population. And now they have the opportunity to do that with total impunity. And this is what is so terrifying at this moment. We are watching genocide with total impunity.
Thank you, Lana. I'm going to really quickly jump to one of the big developments, and you've touched on these videos by Israeli soldiers and some of the statements in the Knesset, which have been very clear about this genocidal intent and the intent to ethnically cleanse the land. A lot of these were used as evidence in the recent case presented by South Africa to the International Criminal Court of Justice, which resulted in these preliminary provisions which have been put forward. Would you be able to just speak a bit to that and what you think maybe the implications of that are, not only globally but also particularly with Australia in mind, and the stance so far of the Australian government around this issue?
So to begin with, the ICJ has been really a significant moment for Palestinians. Not necessarily because the court can stop the genocide, but the fact that South Africa brought that case on behalf of Palestinians to the ICJ. That moment of, third world solidarity. Palestine and South Africa have been always kind of, not apartheid South Africa, but liberated South Africa. Has been always, close allies. The PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, was an ally. Mandela and the resistance movement there in the 70s and 80s when they were in their deepest crisis. So there is here a story of solidarity that has been really moving to Palestinians. even though we know the flaws of international law, even though we know that, we can gain very little justice, if at all, in these fora. But that moment of solidarity, that action of solidarity is really meaningful. And when you look at the list of countries who have backed the South Africa application, it's a moment that makes it really clear that the world is divided again between the West and, by and large, I'm really exaggerating here because the nuance is great, the third world. We are seeing so much solidarity that is happening. There's this kind of revival. In terms of what it means in terms of international law, so many of you would know that it ended with provisional measures that the ICJ ordered Israel. So the ICJ concluded that there is a plausible case of findings of genocide and gave provisional measures to make sure that genocidal acts are not happening. Now, Israel has to meet these provisions, but other countries who are signed on the Genocide Convention have also, Australia included, have also obligations under the convention. They have obligations not to engage in any acts of complicity with genocide. What does it mean for Australia? Arms deals, selling arms to Israel. UNRWA funding, reinstating immediately the funding to the UN agency, who is the main agency supplying aid in Gaza. And Australia has suspended that funding with no evidence. Only allegations by Israel, which now several Western media have already said there is no evidence, confirmed there is no evidence. We knew, however, there was no evidence because we know how Israel, plays that game. That fog, right? You just throw lies and accusations, and then at some point people will catch up and realize this is wrong. We've seen that time and again. The headquarters of Hamas under Shifa Hospital, there is nothing there, right? And we've seen it in other areas as well. And the last one, which is significant, there are people from Australia going to fight for the Israeli army, engaging in the genocide. Australia has the duty to bring criminal charges against those people for their complicity in genocide. So Australia is failing under its obligations under the Genocide Convention. Obviously, the US, Canada, the UK, and so on. But we also see cracks, because what the ICJ ruling means is that every country, every corporation, every university, every institution, it has now been warned not to engage in acts of complicity in genocide. I'm a lecturer. If my university has collaborations with Israeli universities who are now aiding the genocide, that might, let me be careful because I'm on camera and don't want to lose my job, allegedly mean that they might be complicit in aiding genocide. So this is significant. We saw the Netherlands. I don't know if anyone has seen this a couple of days ago. The High Court in the Netherlands ordered the government not to sell parts, the F-35 parts, to Israel anymore. This is massive. Now in Canada, there is a revision. The government is with Israel, but they managed to get some kind of a revision, I can't remember exactly, of the arms deals with reviewing the arms deal in one of the committees, the parliamentary committees. So there are these, small wins. And important also to say that yesterday or 2 days ago, the South African lawyers have submitted an urgent appeal to the ICJ on Rafah, saying that the actions of Israel in Rafah now, asking the court to consider that they're breach of the provisional measures. Now, to be clear, Israel has breached every single provisional measures it was ordered. No aid is going into Gaza. No proper protection of civilians, and so on and so forth. So it would be interesting to see how the court will address the new appeal by South Africa. Israel is due in the end of the month to submit its 30 days report, to which South Africa will have to also afterwards will reply and submit an answer. Are there any high hopes? Not really, but in terms of movement mobilizing, it gives us a lot to work with. Obviously, if it was any, if it was other case, if it was Ukraine or Russia, it would be easier. But we'll take at this stage, despite the limits of international law, and it keeps failing us, we'll take any achievement, any hook that can allow us to advance, lobby. We'll take anything that we can get.
Thank you. I did have want to bring up some of the issues that have arisen around media and censorship, I guess. And we've seen journalists being sacked or resigning over the coverage of Israel and Palestine and what's happening. But I'm also conscious that there might be people with burning questions in the audience, and
we can open it.
Yeah, we don't want this to be just one-sided. So, bearing in mind that we have limited time, is there anyone who maybe would like to pop up? I'll bring you over the mic if that's okay.
Yes, that would be lovely. Thank you so much.
Lana, thank you for your presentation. A little bit closer now. Speak a little bit closer to the mic.
Yeah.
Closer to the mic. Okay. Recently, respected social anthropologist Hassan Hart was fired from his position at the Max Planck Institute in Munich. I know you've covered this issue in your talk, but do you have real fears that universities here may do similar things to anyone that speaks out or mentions the Palestinian question?
Thank you.
Would you like?
Maybe you can take.
Thank you.
You can take more questions, and
Are you happy with that? Yeah.
You can take 2 more. I need to remember. So
Yeah.
2 more.
Anyone else? Yep, Garth in the back. You probably don't need a mic, do you?
No, I don't.
I know this man.
Thanks very much, Lana. Quite inspirational, this conclusion. I'll start rushing.
He does.
Colonisation, occupation, and so on, the intent of Israel was pretty clear from very early on in this conflict. It was pretty obvious what they were up to. Yet the Western countries, including our own country, remain silent. And it's really not until today that we finally heard some small words from our government that say, okay, enough's enough, restraint. But they still haven't called for a permanent ceasefire and so on and so on. Why do you think the West is so complicit in allowing Israel to get away with what they've got away with? They don't want to drop you in it for your university, so please be careful with your words.
This is my area of expertise. That's fine.
Anyone else before we take those 2? Are you happy? Oh, yeah. Fletcher. Thanks.
Thank you. Having encountered the narrative that
a safe haven for Jewish people and Israeli citizens. And given a number of reports coming out that Israeli hostages have actually been killed by the IDF over this conflict, do you think it's reasonable to say that Israel, in pursuit of this ethnic cleansing, values that goal more than they do actual Israeli citizens?
Values, sorry?
Values that goal of ethnic cleansing over Israeli citizens.
No doubt. That was 3 questions.
Yes, you'll have to come back to
I'll
you.
then forget. I'll start with Ghassan Haj. I mean, the situation in terms of academic freedom, definitely in North America, in the UK, and in Germany is absolutely horrifying. Germany is the worst case. In Germany, it's just you cannot speak about Palestine at all. Scholars, you know, ironically, even Jewish, you know, scholars are being cancelled there for accusations of anti-Semitism. There is something extremely twisted in the ways in which the Germans have projected their anti-Semitism onto Palestinians. Now, they're not the source of anti-Semitism anymore. It's like the Palestinians are. This is part of the racism that as Palestinians we face, right? By our existence, we are anti-Semitic. I don't need to usher a word out of my mouth to be an anti-Semitic, right? To be accused of anti-Semitic. This is exactly the Zionist playbook. This is how we are being delegitimized. Our existence, our scholarship, everything. Now, in terms of Ghassan Haj, you know, it's quite a crazy story because, you know, his work is known for anti-racism. He is, you know, his views on Palestine are known, but, you know, he's not the biggest activist on Palestine. And it just shows how low the bar is. You speak about Palestine, you talk about Palestine, you say a word about Palestine, and you lose your job or your affiliation or whatever it is. Now, Ghassan is a very known professor, well respected around the world. He has his position at the University of Melbourne. He is safe. It is uncomfortable. It is unpleasant. He was supposed to be there for several years. But the censorship in academia, think about the more junior scholars who are extremely vulnerable, who are on tenure track, who are sessionals, who are trying to get foot in the door. How many Palestinian scholars are not getting the foot in the door because they are Palestinians? You can't prove it. It's in selection committees. We know this is happening. In the UK, we see, you know, hundreds of cases of, you know, trying to cancel events and persecution of lecturers and student activism. Columbia University in the US banned student groups on Palestine, including Jewish anti-Zionist groups, to that level. Now, the situation in Australia. It's not fantastic. A long way ahead. I'll be honest, better than elsewhere in the West. It doesn't mean it's good enough. Part of it is the chilling effect. I know of so many that are scared to talk about, want to talk about Palestine and scared to talk about Palestine in the classroom. In my school, a second year in a row, there are complaints in a course not about Palestine, that assigns Patrick Wolf's the famous article on settler colonialism and the elimination of the native. That article has 3 paragraphs on Palestine. Students are saying it's anti-Semitic text and need to be removed. It's the classic text in settler colonial studies. Like, you can teach settler colonial studies without this text. This is where we're at, and the chilling effect is absolutely real. On the other hand, we know that students want to talk about Palestine. I know it from students that I have been approached by. I'm giving a workshop in, I don't want to say which university, but in another university, because their consultation with students was that students are frustrated that lecturers are not willing to speak about Palestine in the classroom. I know of other cases where lecturers have instructed students not to speak about Palestine. So the censorship is real, even if it doesn't take, this kind of. It's the chilling effect. The silence is part of the censorship, and that's the aim of the censorship. And there are complaints against lecturers all the time. Every Palestinian lecturer have faced complaints to their workplace, including myself. This is the environment. Every time we organize an event on campus on Palestine, we organize it with the view that there will be mobilization to cancel the event. Luckily, the university has upheld academic freedom. But this is the mindset with which we organize, and we're not paranoids. The university said no, but there were complaints against events, including the event with Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine. We did events where we had people trying to film us. So we're facing also surveillance. There's a whole infrastructure of intimidation. So yes, this is the environment in which we work. That was a very long answer. Now I'll do a much shorter answer, I promise. Okay, the second question was about why. I'm going to be blunt. The DNA of the West is genocide. We are sitting here. We are living in a country founded on genocide. Centuries of imperialism and colonialism. Genocide didn't start with the Holocaust. There were many genocides before as well. So, and what was terrifying to me in this moment, this particular moment, is how much it is part of the DNA of the West. Despite all the efforts since the end of Second World War to build an international human rights regime, international law that protects civilians, that protects people, and we see the most horrifying events in Second World War, and the West is back to its core, backing genocide. It's not just that they're letting Israel act with impunity. They're providing the weapons, the political cover, the diplomatic cover. And we can't understand this without really going to the history of the West. Imperialism, colonialism. It's not a coincidence that the moment of Gaza has been traumatizing for so many people from formerly colonized nations. I mean, that's the story. Israel. Israel will sacrifice its citizens for territorial expansion, no doubt, and for less than that. Israel could have, there was a negotiation, prisoners exchange deal on the table from the first week. Israel has refused because the main goal was the war in Gaza, the genocide. And the problem is, as they worked with impunity, they're constantly testing the boundaries. And they got away with everything, with destroying hospitals, with starving population, dehydrating population to death. So, what is few civilians, right? In the bigger scheme of things. So, yeah, no doubt. And, you know, this is not just me saying. Even those who support, Israelis who support the genocide, but want to see the Israeli hostages out, you know, back in Israel, released, they're also calling Israel to prioritize the release of hostages because they know that Israel is not doing that. So even the citizens of Israel know this is the case. This is what is happening with the protests in Israel for the release of prisoners. I think I've answered all of them.
Thank you. Did we have another question? Yes. That was the last one she just answered. Yeah, we're good. Thank you, Adele.
Yeah, thank you, Lana. Excellent talk. The African National Council in South Africa,
Yeah.
and the Nelson Mandela and his group never sold out. We are struggling here in Australia because we have a Palestinian Authority that are council workers for Israel. Mahmoud Abbas has not come out to date, made a statement condemning Israel. Our so-called Palestinian ambassador, Azzad Abdel Hadi, who I know quite well, and belittled me when I got my head cut off years ago. And he's very silent. Where do we go from here, Lana? Just some advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Adele.
Oh, sorry, one more thing. Azzad is against BDS as well. He sits with Rosanna, an Israeli organization, and when we wrote to him collectively, and you know that letter, he sent us a letter berating us. Where do we go from here?
Thank you. It's a great question. Anyone else, or do you want to?
Any other questions? Okay.
Did you say? Did I see your hand, Megan? No. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
This is really a great question. I think this is our tragedy. The Palestinian Authority is a sellout. They are agents of the occupation. They're aiding the colonization of Palestine. There is no way around it. This is also how they're seen by Palestinians. I remember in the early days after 7th of October, there were these videos coming out from El Khalil, from Hebron, and other parts of the West Bank. And people were on the streets chanting, الشعب يريد إسقاط الرئيس, which is a chant that comes from the Arab uprisings in 2011, which means the people want the fall of the Rais, of the president. You know, they knew immediately. They know. And the problem is that we know that there are imperial powers that wants to see the Palestinian Authority because it serves their interest. And the tragedy is that rather than just fighting the occupation, Palestinians have to also fight leadership that has been imposed on them. Because that leadership is an obstacle to to resisting the occupation. I mean, for God's sake, they detain fighters. They detain Palestinian activists. They assassinate Palestinian activists. Nizar Bannat, brutally beaten to death by thugs of the Palestinian Authority. So, yes, it's absolutely a tragedy. And I'll just add that the Oslo Accords, when the Oslo Accords were signed, Edward Said published, I think it was in the London Review of Books, an essay, long essay called The Morning After. Now, Edward Said was against the Oslo Accords. He also resigned from the PLO. And there he exactly warned about that. He exactly said what you said. The ANC never sold out. They never agreed to be a security partner of the South African apartheid state. And he said what will happen is that the Palestinian Authority will become the arm of Israel. He predicted that, immediately after the signing of the Oslo Accords. And we see that happening now. I wanted to end with that, but I'll also say the silence of the Palestinian Authority is even, they're silent on the genocide, but it's worse than that. They're seeing in the genocide an opportunity of destroying Hamas and coming back to Gaza. So while the people are being butchered, well, there are over now 35,000 Palestinians dead and under the rubble. Over 13,000 children dead. The Palestinian Authority is busy negotiating its role post-genocide. This is what they're doing. This is what they're concerned about. But they're not our leadership. And this is something that is important to keep repeating. They're not our leadership. They're not elected. They're not supported. They have zero legitimacy among the Palestinian people. Zero legitimacy. What we do have is impressive grassroots activism that is happening. And we saw that in the last few years, and it has been absolutely inspiring. And they've been crushed by the PA as well. But there is an alternative. But again, with imperial powers, giving that alternative, an opportunity to actually take its place is very difficult. But people are trying, people are resisting, and unfortunately also resisting the PA. This is the tragedy of where we are now.
Thank you, Lana. We're close to finishing up, and I'm conscious that we have these wonderful people hosting us. I don't want to push your generosity to its edges. Maybe really quickly we could wrap up on, taking all that into account and just the sheer scale of what we're facing and the obstacles when it comes to Palestinian solidarity and seeing something shift. Is there anything you'd like to, invite those who wish to support Palestinians both here in Australia, but also more broadly, and I guess aspects where you see maybe weaknesses or glimmers of hope for activism?
Thank you. I think there was so much activism. I mean, we've seen globally millions on the street. This is the biggest anti-war movement since the war in Iraq. That's absolutely clear. It's been, over 4 months now? And it's sustained engagement and protest. And I know there is also a lot of frustration. I know I have frustration. So much objection to this genocide, and yet somehow it is continuing. Well, somehow, Western support, it is continuing. And people are not being listened to. And that's a different story, but this is really a crisis of democracy, right? Of Western democracy. So this moment is really showing so much more. But the sustained protest in different forms must continue. Must continue. As much as the situation is bleak, imagine without sustained resistance and objection. So what could be done? I guess what could be done, I guess I can say, and probably most, a lot of you are doing this. Go to protest if you can. Write to your local MPs. Hosting teach-ins, such as this one. Unions. Oh my God, unions. Unions have to play a key role. In your workplace, with colleagues, if you're doctors, nurses, I don't know, lawyers, working in in farming, food, right? Like speaking about politics of food and politics of land. Whatever you're doing, just keep talking about Gaza, keep talking about Palestine, keep being and doing wherever you can. And I know that I'm not undermining at all the hostile environment against people who speak on Palestine. They can't defend their position. So what they have is just being bullies and act like thugs because they have no way of defending themselves. And people are talking more and more on Palestine. And that's, there are a lot of people who are silent still. I know I get frustrated with a lot of colleagues. But also, so many more people are talking. So this is what we have. We just continue and fight and continue to resist and hope that a permanent ceasefire is coming soon. I'm not too optimistic, but I'm not a religious person as well, but I pray for that. I'm like, we just need a permanent ceasefire. And, it's not that the situation will be amazing after, not at all. There's a long way ahead. But we need an immediate ceasefire now. Hundreds are killed daily. And the starvation is getting worse. No hospitals. We need a ceasefire now. And Australia has to, I don't know how, but the Australian government has to change its course of action. It is shameful. It is just shameful. So keep resisting, keep fighting, keep being doing whatever you're doing and whatever you can. And it's okay to have limits as well.
Thank you. Join me in thanking our wonderful guest, Dr. Lana Tatour, for everything she shared with us.
And Grace.
It's not stopping. Thank you so much. Well deserved. I just want to quickly, again, acknowledge the huge generosity and courage of our Chana and their colleagues for hosting us tonight and giving us this beautiful space to meet and have this really important conversation. I want to acknowledge the brilliant team from the Grassroots Action Network Northern Tasmania who've been on the door and helping with logistics today. Tom, Dr. and Lana, thank you so much. I also want to thank Lisa again for her welcome to the country. Oh, you're there. I didn't know if you'd left, but I gestured to your empty chair. Thank you so much for welcoming us to the country. And last but not at all least, to Rosh, who's been recording for us, so we might be able to share some of this content afterwards in some format, which is wonderful. And last but not least, to all of you who've given up your time.
And to Grace.
Yeah, whatever. There's a whole team around the Launceston for Palestine Collective who have been giving up their weekends and organising so many things in the fabric of their days over the last 4 months. Some incredible people, some of them are in the room, some of them I've seen at rallies again and again. It's a multitude of organisations, the Grassroots Action Network Northern Tasmania, TPAN, Friends of Palestine, the House of Guidance, Masjid in Kings Meadows, the mosque community. We're all working together around these events and these activities and trying to keep the issue up front and centre. And you'll find us on Facebook if you want to be part of that journey, always open to more energy and contributions. Thank you again for being here.